Back to It Takes a Village, the podcast where we explore the intersections of faith, community, belonging, and today we're going to be talking about leadership. I'm your host, Reverend Dr. Jenny Schultz-Thomas, and I am joined by a special guest today, one of our very own leaders, that is Dan Loven-Crum, our Director of Administration. Welcome,
morning.
Dan.
Good morning.
How are you?
Good.
Today marks your 13th anniversary
Yes,
as
I've
Director
been here
of Administration.
13 years.
Wow.
Every February, I look and like, okay, how many years has this been?
Wow. 13 years. You've been here for 13 years, and you are still here. That is an amazing feat. Dan's impact at Countryside goes far beyond finance and operations. Over the years, Dan has helped lead worship planning during transitions, guided staff change, supported the church's ongoing growth and evolution, and brings a lot of levity, I will add, to the seriousness of our role and our work here at Countryside. Beyond his work, Dan is also deeply grounded, a very creative person, is a yoga master, has done a lot of things outside of the work of church, has an MBA, worked in the corporate world for a while, has a background that you might hear more about. But today we're going to explore Dan's journey here at Countryside, the lessons he's learned, and what it means to be a leader behind the scenes in a vibrant faith community. Dan, welcome again. Happy 13th. How does it feel?
It's been 13 years. Sometimes it seems forever, and sometimes it seems like I just started back in the day when and it's a cold, snowy day, and I remember when we first got here, we pulled in, and we were in one of these short-term stay places.
Oh, yeah.
And my husband and I we woke up in the morning, and it was like it had been a 12-inch snow, and it was just blanketed, and it was all silent and all that. And my husband's like, "What in the world did you get me into?"
Well, and that was right from Phoenix, right?
Yeah, we came from Phoenix after. So my husband Mike is from Memphis area, actually from grew up in Mississippi. And then he moved to Phoenix, and I'm from Minnesota, and I moved to Phoenix, and that's where we met. And and then we got decided that this is where we were coming, and so Mike and the snow and Omaha was a whole new experience.
A whole new experience.
Yes.
Right. Well, I mean, at least you with Minnesota grew up with this cold, right? He probably thought you pulled one over on him. So, so many people have this really intense question for you, and it's a great opportunity for you to give the answer right here on the podcast. Okay. So, is it Dan Crum? Is it Mike Levin? Is it Dan Loven? Or is it Dan Levin? Whose last name is which? And then, is it Loven-Crum or Loven-Crum?
So, when I first got here, we had not gotten married yet, so I was Dan Loven. And if you say my last name more like the Swedish way, like my grandma, that's more Loven. And if you say it more like the Norwegian way, it's more like Loven. And so my dad, when he moved out of the family farm area and went to Minneapolis from North Dakota, he and several other brothers of 10 brothers and 3 sisters decided to go by Loven, and so we were always Lovens. And then when Mike and I got married, Mike is Crum, is his last name, C-R-U-M, and we kept going, well, how are we going to do this? And Loven-Crum rolled off your tongue much better than Crum, Loven, or any other combination. Right. So that's how we moved from Loven to Loven-Crum.
That's how the magic goes. I remember the same thing when we were deciding this. So I was always Jenny Schultz, Shannon Thomas, and we had Sage, and he was probably 2.5, and he just could not understand, why is he Schultz Thomas, and we have different last names. And so we were planning on, kind of doing it anyway, but we played with it like Jenny Thomas Schultz, Jenny Schultz Thomas, and it just, what rolls off the tongue is what you go with, right? It's as simple as that.
And it's fun. The fun that around town, and every once in a while I get somebody go, I just love that name, Loven-Crum.
Right? See, you're right. You rolled here on that snow blanketed day, and you never left. You picked the right name.
Yep.
And here we are today, Village. Well, 13 years in any role, Dan, is an incredible feat. I think I have 10 years is my longest time serving in one place. What first brought you to Countryside? I mean, that's an interesting story in itself, but I know that you could probably name some specific things, and then kind of what has kept you here?
So I grew up in Minnesota, went to University of Minnesota, and got a engineering job with Motorola in Phoenix. And so that's what took me to Phoenix, and I worked for them almost 15 years.
Wow.
And so that was my first career. But while the last few years at Motorola, I decided to get my master's MBA. And I discovered that the world was much bigger than just working for the same company for all those years. And during my MBA, I actually was going to Thunderbird School of Management in Phoenix, which is an international business school. And it was just, I did that just because it was available and it was a good school. And so when as I was taking classes, I'm with people from Japan, I'm people from Americas. I had somebody from Switzerland. It was just the world was much bigger than just a mom or Motorola, which had people that worked for them for 25 years. It was very family orientated, and the business world was changing, and I ended up shutting down a factory, and everything. The world was changing, and so I decided to end my career with Motorola and finish my MBA, and then I was sort of going, what is next?
Wow.
And that's when I had a couple years where I decided I was going to, I think we're going to talk a little bit more about yoga, but I became a yoga instructor at that time and trying to figure out what was my future life. And so at the same time, I had been going to a spinoff of the Metropolitan Community Church in Phoenix called Community Church of Hope. And then Mike and I had gone there for about 10 years, and I just was like, I'm going to try a different church. And one of the things about MCC churches are that they're predominantly a gay church, a fellowship of people. And I wanted to be a Christian first. and gay second. Was sort of my thinking. So I ended up at a UCC church, which was the same church that our former pastor, Eric Elness, was at. And after being there a year, he announced that he was leaving for Omaha. And I stayed there, and probably 2-3 years later, Eric called me up and said, just FYI, we have a administrator position that's just opening up, and just was wondering if you're interested in something like that. And I decided, I actually didn't apply for the job until 5 o'clock the day that they were closing. Because I was debating, is this really, do I just jump into something like this? But I knew my calling was to do some church work. And I knew that felt right. So that's when I applied, and next thing I know, we're moving in on
snowy day.
And
here we are, right? What a beautiful journey.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, it speaks so much to the kind of person that you are, like all in, right? Waiting until 5 p.m., discerning, listening, thinking about it, and then deciding, yep, here we go, Mike. We are all in. Oh, that's amazing. I love hearing that story. I mean, I've heard it before, but I know sharing it, right, opens up even new ways of telling and being present to your own story. So as our listeners are listening to Dan's story, some of you may have heard parts of this, may know all of this story, but Dan, one of the things that is unique is not finding a calling, but finding that calling and abiding in that calling in that community over a period of time, especially with many transitions. I mean, big things the Tri-Faith Initiative for one, but pastors come and go, staff come and go, conflicts, amazing growth, so many changes in an organization, sometimes kind of put you on that discerning path again. But you have continued to remain steadfast in supporting this community and seem to always be growing yourself. So what, if you could speak to that, what has kept you kind of here at Countryside for these 13 years?
My one is, my role hasn't been just, operations or just,
Right.
just the finances or those things. So I've had opportunity to work with so many different people in so many different roles and learn so many different things. So that's one piece of it is I'm always looking for the next creative solution to things. And so, I've always had opportunities to help move things forward and find creative ways that we do things to make a better place. But the other one is, I've over the years, it's like, okay, do I feel called to, is there another church or another role of, pretty much I've looked primarily in church work, other church administrator positions. But I've never had the release to leave. And, a few times I might have looked, and then a year later it's like, oh, I was needed to be here. And I remember one person that said to me about longevity and with all the changes was, I'm glad you're here for the constant. And so part of that is, I would say that's sort of that, I've just not had the release to be able to say, okay, I feel Countryside, God has got Countryside, that I don't need to be that constant. Or and it's not that I need to be here to keep moving things forward, but I just felt like God was asking me to stay here. And so I've been here now 13 years.
That's right. I mean, what an interesting way, too, for you to connect how you experience that movement of spirit, right? A release of, it's like being a part of a community. It's like a puzzle, right? A family, all the pieces fit together. And clearly you're still a vital piece, right, in that puzzle. And even when puzzles, because I love doing puzzles, right? At the beach, there's always a puzzle at my house. Even when the puzzle is complete, sometimes there's one piece missing, and it sort of feels like, what? And all the pieces were here, right? And then I always look to one of my children or the dogs, right? Where is the piece, right? And then you find that missing piece, and you were already sort of excited that you have almost finished this puzzle when you're looking at it. But until you put the one piece in, you can't have that relief and that celebration, all of your hard work, right? And there's I think it's Shel Silverstein, like The Missing Piece, The Big O and The Missing Piece. They're two different books that she's written. They're children's books, but they're for all of us, right? It's this, when you're still a vital piece of a community, you know it, you feel it in your deep soul, and the release isn't there until you know it, right? Everyone else might be like, oh, yes, but even in places of vitality and growth, sometimes that's even when you realize the depths of how important you are to a place, right? So not only through difficulty and the constant, because there's a lot of change or transition, but in moments of vitality and growth and celebration, then you can actually join in the celebration and the next chapter of helping people to see how they also, right, are in this really wonderful, overflowing kind of spiritual community. But yeah, it is unique to each one of us, how we sense God's call forward, nudge, or that release. We're definitely not releasing you right now, so don't even ask. But I love the way you share that. And you have played such a vital role in the financial and operational side. I mean, we don't want to take that, and make light of that, because to be an administrator of a community and a complex organization like Countryside, you have to be very skilled and nimble and know how to do that work, but also know how to work with others in relationship, because you can't do that work in a vacuum, right? Passing a budget takes a lot of politicking, a lot of assuaging people's fears about oh, yes, we're going to get there. God provides in these situations. I've seen it 13 years and running. I know. So you have the skill set, but you also have the deep relational skills, right, that bring people together and you build trust. And I think those are things that sometimes people take for granted when you have someone who plays that part so well and who's very genuine and who sees it as a ministry like you do. Talk about some of the other things, like you wear a lot of other hats on your day-to-day. I mean, during transitions, you helped plan worship. You have been a constant in transition. You support so many lay leaders, so many staff. But how do you see your role beyond the day-to-day tasks if you kind of get on the balcony and look down into your own setting?
A few things come to mind that over the years. I mean, I always say, one of the phrases I say often is, if it doesn't preach or sing, I probably have something to do with it. And those aren't specific things that I'm called to do, but I see how what I do impacts all the little parts of what we do here at Countryside. Mm-hmm. So that's one piece of that. Another one, as you were talking, I was thinking back to when your candidating weekend, and Chris Hess and I were standing up because the information session was downstairs, or the meet and greet, and Chris Hess and I were standing upstairs as people were coming in, and I was like, I was like, okay, that person is such and such, and they do this and this, and then that would be like this next person would be, that person does this and this, you know. And I was, even though I might not have gotten everybody's name correctly, but after a little bit of thinking, I was like, they're connected to this person, to that person. And I think a big part of that is just, for me, is just making those connections and, you know, stopping by at night as a small groups meeting and just saying hi, how you know, just saying hi. Going to the Minutes Breakfast. When I first started, I never attended Minutes Breakfast, and then after COVID and Eric Ellis left, and I was like, well, they don't have anybody because they always had a minister or somebody that was attended it. So I started attending, and now I'm a regular at Tuesday morning Men's Breakfast. But I think it's those just connections. The other one is because we have the boards, and every year we nominate another third of the people to take on leadership roles at the church. And I always say my role changes with each change of how the leadership in the church. And so it's building those relationships, understanding what our strengths and weaknesses are, and how do we do church together. And it does change. It's always it's an evolving thing. So those are the pieces, and you know, and I've participated in worship services. I participated in youth trips. I've been on youth trips before. So I've been able to participate in a wide variety of activities that are happening. And then there are times where I'm like, somebody says, well, why don't you come to this? And I'm like, I just need to go home. I've already been here. And sometimes that's a frustrating part of being in church, is that there are so many great things that we're doing. And sometimes you just have to say, I'm not going to attend that. You all have a good time.
That's such a good point you make, because, you know, with longevity, especially in a church, you build significant relationships, and you have a minister's heart. I mean, you're ministering when you're doing these things. So the boundary is hard to say, no, I have to go do some self-care. I'm going to go. Mike has 17 dogs at my house. I'm going to go relieve him for 5 minutes. But yeah, it's hard to know what that balance is sometimes, because you're also care a lot about it. You get so caught up in it because you are caught up in their success. And that is usually because of relationships. right? They're wanting to do these things. The church, we all want to be together because we find these are pretty cool people that we like, and we're caring about the same things. So that's always the challenge in ministry, and you're naming the challenge of ministry is knowing how to do self-care while you're also super excited and want to pour into the life of the church. But a good thing is knowing that when you go and take care of yourself, that's when you can be revitalized and renewed for the next best thing, right? And you're such a creative person and are eager to learn, right? So that's I would say one of the things that keeps you coming back and engaging is because you have this learned, and eager to continue learning spirit. So people invite you into a group, you want to know what they're doing, right? And you're like, oh, that's great, right? But then you can kind of go back and say, how can I support you in doing the thing that you love? And I think that, to me, is the heart of ministry. No matter what role we play right here on ministry staff, it's how can I help you do the thing that you love? Because my success is grounded in yours, which is hopefully in the growth of the human spirit, right? And how we see that God is in us and is growing through us. So thank you for sharing some of that. There's always so many things, right, that happen on a day-to-day basis in the life of the church. Do you have any sort of, big lessons that you might have learned either about yourself in leadership or about, institution of church or just, church from where you sit, as an administrator? Any lessons that you might say, over time, these are some of the things that I have kind of grounded in, some truths that I have experienced or...
Just a couple things that, one that comes to mind is God shows up. And, I've seen budget talks for 13 years.
Right.
And the amazing part of it is, we're always trying to balance the budget and make getting the income coming in. And after I look back at 13 years, the church hasn't been wanting. There's been cuts and things that have been adjusted to try to meet the needs. But some money will come in, or a gift will come in, or new people will be adding to it, or even if we lose some, and people are like, oh, that family moved away. But if you look back at 13 years, God's always here. Mm-hmm. We have the resources we need to keep moving forward. So that's a constant in all of that, is that we're not, God is showing up
right
in what we're doing. And even though we might have ups and downs and changes and, things that we might think are not going right, but that's a constant in it all, is God shows up in what we're doing. The other piece is change is always happening, and that in everything, all the leadership that we have in the church over the 13 years I've been here, is that people show up to do the work, and they might approach it differently or might bring us a separate way to it, but they all have that same passion and wanting to do the best for Countryside. And it's even it just at each we have boards. I mean, we've now changed board sizes, but at one point we had like 120 people on boards, and every one of those people are wanting to make Countryside a better place. And so that's another sort of overarching thought I have. And the last one is that it's not defined what church looks like.
Right. A lot of change in that.
I sometimes I think, it's about how do we, I think back, I've said it before, is think about when you're kids and you played church.
Yeah.
And it's not that we're playing church, but we're creating church as a congregation. And so if we approach it that way, and we're able to keep learning and growing and watching God God show up in everything we do. It's a pretty amazing thing we do.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it that way, there's only success.
Yeah.
Right? There's no failing. God is always present and showing up. We're just sort of co-creating our best selves to meet God where God invites us. That's a beautiful way of saying that, Dan. I love to like playing church. It reminds me of, as a preacher, you have preachers' kids, and they will get the hymnal, since they were little, right? Go to the piano and they would get the hymnal and put it out, and they would start doing, Shannon was a music director, right? So they would start doing Sage and Quinn, either one of them would start preaching. It just reminds us that we are always practicing church and we're always modeling. Like these leaders every year, leaders and participants and members are always modeling for ourselves, right? How to meet God and invite God in. And no matter what the structures, right? In church leadership, we call it like the forms and functions of church. They go back all the way to the earliest church, right? So there's just different people who come to the work. But what you're describing is that everyone who's coming to the work is coming because God is calling and they're responding. And
Yep.
so our job is to sort of sit there and hold a hand, and how can we help create that space so that you can create the kind of church experience that God is calling you to. And that is constant, but the change piece is the refining part. Right? We're always refining how we do this. It's not sort of a ladder where you're getting to the top. It's sometimes you lay the ladder down and you go back and forth from rung to rung because there's no perfect church. It's just inviting people to be fully present. And that's the heart of church. It's abiding with God that we might be love. So I love that. I mean, we have the best jobs out there. You know that, right? Don't tell anyone. We have the best jobs out there. So shifting gears as we close, there's a lot, and you just explained that, you could be here 12 hours a day, and you definitely have been here many times, 12 hours a day. How do you balance, the professional and the personal, and find your own spiritual practice that keeps you grounded?
That's a good question.
Well, I know you have yoga. I would love to hear about that, but is it hard to get there?
Yoga is part of is a part of me. That comes and goes. If you get busy, then all of a sudden you realize that you're not doing
your yoga practice.
Your yoga practice or your practice of just being present. And so then you have to sort of focus back on that and not let things overwhelm you and take control. So that's those things. It's just quiet moments. Another one for me is my garden. And in the summer is just getting on your hands and knees and pulling weeds can be a great way of just getting things that are just to get away and move forward.
Yeah. Get your hands dirty.
Yep.
Clean it out metaphorically and physically, like reconnect with yourself and with the spirit in that way.
And part of yoga practice is just breathing and taking a moment just to pause and be present. And those are all little things that I draw upon. Even I might also I take 10 deep breaths and I just breathe in, breathe out, and see if I can be present for 10 breaths. Those are little things that you just do on the side to move forward.
And make sure that you're staying connected to that deep self.
Yep.
So, in closing, Dan, what would you offer to our congregation, to those who are listening, one word of encouragement or one reminder to make sure that they too are taking care of themselves?
Just pause. If one of the reasons I always said I taught yoga was that if I could get somebody to take a moment and be present is why I taught yoga. Even if it was just all the movements, if you had experienced a moment in time that you were present, that I did my job.
Well, friends, that's right. Be present to self, be present to the spirit, and know that God is always with and within. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time.